In today's world, everywhere you turn, you are bombarded with things to worry about and people who think you should worry about them. The collective human belief is that danger is lurking around every corner. Why is it that we're so convinced that we need to worry? It's because we think that worrying allows us to see potential negative outcomes and thus prepare for them. The problem is we live in a law of attraction-based universe. And in a universe that is based on the law of attraction, there's really no such thing as repelling. That means that if you focus at something you don't want, the universe doesn't hear that you don't want it, it's only responding to your focus. And so, focusing at something you don't want is as good as inviting it. The same goes for something you do want. Focus at something you want, and the universe listens to your focus. And so, what you want comes to you. The moral of the story is anything you focus on becomes part of your reality, whether you want it or not. There is no such thing as pushing something out of your experience in an attraction-based universe. Here's this funny situation that happens with people. We worry about something happening, and then it happens to us, and then we feel justified and validated for having worried. We say, see, I told you. I'm so incredibly glad I worried about that because it definitely happened. Didn't you notice? What we miss, though, is that we, by virtue of living in this universe, which is managed by law of attraction, which is the byproduct of the thoughts we're thinking, we are the ones who have created this experience. So we first create the experience that we don't want to have happen, and then feel justified about having worried about it, not realizing that the worry, which is intense focus upon what is unwanted, is the exact thing which created the scenario in the first place. You can't prove, even if you don't 100% believe you create your reality or not. We think that worrying is good for us because we think it allows us to foresee a negative scenario and then plan for it so it doesn't have as much impact on us. Because we fail to recognize that in the process of focusing on it, we're creating that in our reality. Because we think worry is good for us, we think pain is good for us. When we worry, we feel emotional pain. It doesn't feel good to focus on something that is unwanted, but we have to ignore our emotional guidance system in order to continue worrying. And just like I said in my previous video on why we're addicted to suffering, we think pain is good. If I worry, even though I'm feeling that pain, I will prevent myself from further pain. So pain is serving me. This is why we can't let go of worry. But I think this is a fairly powerless way of going about it. Why would we spend our time, waste our time really, focusing on a scenario which we don't want to have happen, and thus create it in the process? Why not just focus on what you would rather have happen? Or find any way you can find to release resistance to that worst-case scenario. Many of us, especially those of us who worry, feel as if the universe is against us. And the universe seems so much larger than us, so it feels as if we are up against something we can't win against. But nonetheless, we organisms of Earth are survivalists, and so we try to win all the same. Our survival and basic human need of certainty is at risk if we don't win. So we use worry to try to outsmart the adversary, and our adversary is the universe. Those of us who worry find it very hard to focus positively. It makes us feel like ignorant sitting ducks about to get shot in a pond. We think there is going to be a consequence for positive focus. We spend our time focusing on consequences or potential problems. But what we do not understand is that focusing on consequences and potential problems is much different than focusing on solutions. It's like those of us who worry are headed off a cliff. We are so convinced that we are headed towards impending doom and that doom is what we deserve that we keep focusing on the fall. We feel powerless to our own realities and we think we can't avoid that pain, so we spend our time focusing on and preparing for that pain. In our minds, if we know what to expect, it won't hurt so bad. We focus on the fall and not on the fact that we could just get out of the water now, before we ever reach the edge of that waterfall. This is a vibrational universe. Everything in this universe is attracted to one another in this law of attraction-based universe by virtue of what vibration it holds. The problem, which is what we're focused on when we worry, holds a different vibratory rate than the solution. So we cannot actually be focused on the problem, i.e. worrying, and be a match to the solution at the same time. It's a vibrational contradiction. The solution cannot come to you if you are focused on the problem. This is why worrying never feels good. It never leads to what we hope it will lead us to, which is solutions. We use worry to inspire ourselves towards solution-focused preparation. But once we begin to switch our focus to solutions, we give worry the credit when worry was the resistance to the solution. It was the contrast. It was in no way responsible for that solution. The focus on solution was responsible for the solution. Worry is the opposite of solution-oriented focus. You see, the idea of a potential problem in the future does not in and of itself cause us pain. It's just information which hasn't happened yet. What causes us pain is when we think that potential future problem is impossible to avoid. It's impending. We can't escape it. We just have to prepare for the blow. And chronic worriers hold this belief that no matter what, the things which they foresee in the future are inevitable. See, if we only focus on a potential future problem, like let's say you're getting ready for a camping trip, and you think about potentially getting rained on, that thought doesn't cause you pain, because the minute you see that thought, you can do something to prepare for it. Like, okay, if it rains on me, I'm just going to bring a rain slicker to put over the tent. So that idea didn't cause you pain, it simply inspired you towards what you would prefer your trip to look like, some sort of action to take to ensure the outcome which you want. But when we are thinking, okay, it's going to rain, I can't do anything about the fact that it's going to rain, I am going to get wet, end of story. That's when we start to feel a sense of pain relative to future circumstances which are unwanted. Those of us who worry, number one, don't believe we create our own reality, even if we desperately want to believe that we do. Number two, those of us who worry believe deep down that we are not good enough to deserve love or reward, and so we think instead that we deserve punishment. Number three, those of us who worry believe that whoever or whatever does create our reality is the authority figure, and so we ascribe the personality traits we associated with our primary authority figure in our lives over the traits of the universe, and we expect the same kind of treatment from the universe that we got from that original authority figure in our lives. And most of us who worry had an authority figure that believed in punishment. And so we come to expect the same kind of treatment from the universe as we got from mom or dad or from whoever that primary authority figure was. We expect the universe to cause us pain. We have a love-hate relationship with the universe. We expect the universe to hurt us. And just like we felt with our primary authority figure as children, we do not feel like we can escape the impending punishment and consequences for not being good enough. Here is the most important realization for worriers. We think that worry keeps us safe or at the very least lessens our pain, but as long as I'm worrying, I'm not feeling safe and I'm feeling pain. So I will most likely spend my life never actually experiencing safety, never actually experiencing enjoyment. And that does no good for me, because I'd be better off dying now and getting over with the worst case scenario than living my life like that. Better off to die and let others die than spend my life using them as my excuse to be out of alignment. Worrying keeps me and the ones I love dead and injured. Why is that? Reality is what the mind perceives. My reality is whatever my mind is focused on. It has already been scientifically proven again and again that the mind does not know the difference between what you are thinking about and what is actually happening. If you are focused on the worst case scenario is the only reality you can perceive, even if the person you're worried about is alive and well. In your mind, they are already dead and injured. You are making them dead or injured in your mind. Worrying is living the worst case scenario, so you may as well let go and let it happen. You are already living it. If I worry about my son dying every day, he is dead. Even when he is alive, he is dead. My emotions tell me so. That is why you have that same sinking feeling when you look at him. I'm going to present a radical idea. By worrying, we can live out the worst-case scenario without actually having to live through it physically. Worry prevents us from seeing reality. It makes now not exist. It makes all that exists a future that we can't deal with. And should what we are worried about not happen, we will worry about something else. Look at your life with worry. Why try to prevent that calamity in the first place if our life is nothing but preparation for the next calamity and the next calamity? It's not like life gets better for us. We have an option. Choose to die or decide that living this way is not worth preventing the worst-case scenario. We need to decide that it is better to be a sitting duck in a pond for a few days of bliss in that pond water than a duck that lives every day of its life panic-stricken and looking for the hunter to point a gun at them. What kind of life is it that you're trying to preserve? If we are chronic worriers, there is no kind of life to preserve, so why are you trying so hard to preserve it? And those of us who are chronic worriers will feel better at the knowledge of this. Because this is a vibrational universe, the minute that you stop your incessant focus upon something, you cannot be a vibrational match to it. And if you are not a vibrational match to it, it cannot show up in your reality. So us stopping this incessant focus on whatever we're worrying about is the exact way to avoid what we're worrying about. We're just convinced we live in a backwards universe where focus upon something ensures that it won't happen. You aren't going to release worry all at once, and nor should you expect yourself to. You've been practicing a lifetime of this belief that worry is the very reason that you and your loved ones are alive. You've been practicing the idea that worrying about someone is loving them. So don't expect yourself to give it up all at once. But here are some tips which will help you to let go of your worry. Do not worry about worrying. Acknowledge and observe your anxious thoughts and feelings. Don't try to ignore, fight, or control them like you usually would. Instead, simply observe them as if from an outsider perspective, without reacting or judging. It will not work to try to think positively when you're worrying. The worry has to be acknowledged. So ask yourself this question. Why is it that worrying about something doesn't automatically mean that I am going to experience that something? It's because some of us hold the firm belief that if we worry about something, we can outsmart the universe, and it's less likely to happen if we worry about it. And when we hold that firm belief, what we make ourselves a vibrational match to is not the calamity itself, but instead more worry. This is more often the case with chronic worriers. If you're a chronic worrier, you are going to continually manifest and line up with more things to worry about, more circumstances which cause you worry. This is why some of us who worry about car wrecks are always getting in near accidents on the road without getting into actual accidents. I'll tell you a story about my son. Recently, we were a match to my son falling down and breaking his arm. I tend to be a chronic worrier when it comes to my son. I have to admit it. So, what happened is he got his cast off, and the doctor told us that because he did not have muscles around his bone that were strong enough, we needed to be very careful with his activity for the next week. I instantly started to worry, because how easy is it to control what a 4-year-old does and doesn't do, whether they fall or don't fall? So he decided to go on a hike with someone who lived in my household. You all know Blake. I have a belief that Blake is not very observant when it comes to watching what children do or don't get themselves into. So that created more worry within me. And I told myself, quit worrying. This is just you creating the scenario you don't want to have happen. I was basically telling myself to shut up and quit focusing on it when I was focused on it. So sure enough, what happened is they went on a walk and he fell down, came home, and we were completely convinced that he had rebroken his arm. For about 5 hours, I was in panic, sitting in my room thinking that the worst case scenario had happened. The day he got his cast off, he re-broke his arm. What ended up happening, though, is that it was just a bone bruise. Why is it that I manifested that? Because I made myself not a match to the worst case scenario, but like usual, a match to more things to worry about. Because I did not bother to take time to release resistance to my own worry, which might have looked like walking up to Blake and telling him, by looking him straight in the face, you can't let him out of the backpack. That would have been all it took for me to release resistance to my worry so that I wasn't the one focused on it all day long like I was. When it comes to worry, you are going to be focusing on what you're worried about all day, even if it's subconscious. So you can't tell yourself not to worry. And it also does no good to worry about worrying. That's just adding fire to fire. And it's also you failing to realize that most of the time, the worst case scenario does not happen because all we do when we worry is make ourselves a match to more scenarios which make us worry. Step 2. In order to give up worry, you have to convince yourself that worry does not serve a positive purpose. I understand that you can't give up worry all at once, but you will never give it up if it still serves you. So really take an in-depth look at worry in your life. Is it doing you any good? Or is it, in fact, doing the opposite of good in your life? Don't resist your own worry by trying to tell yourself or trying to force yourself to stop worrying. Thought stopping, as they call it, backfires because it forces you to pay extra attention to the very thought you want to avoid. If you tell yourself, don't think about a plane crash, don't think about a plane crash, you will be thinking about a plane crash because the law of attraction applies to thoughts, including everything that's physical. So if you focus on a thought, like you're doing when you're saying, not plane crash, you're focusing on plane crashes, more thoughts that vibrate at the same frequency of plane crash will be attracted into your experience. You'll be thinking an endless chain of thoughts about plane crashes. Telling yourself to stop worrying does not work. You can distract yourself or suppress anxious thoughts for a moment, but you can't banish them for good. In fact, trying to do so makes them stronger and more persistent. So when you start to panic, apply the Byron Katie process called the work to each thought. Question that thought. Ask yourself, is it true? Who are you with the thought? Who are you? What does your reality look like without that thought? And then turn it around. I'm going to be destitute. Let's say that's the thought. We'll turn around to, I'm going to make myself destitute. Another turnaround is, I'm not going to be destitute. Another turnaround is, they are going to be destitute. And another turnaround is, I am going to be wealthy. You want to find 3 scenarios, 3 items of proof that will prove the validity of those turnaround statements. You have to get way outside the box for this activity and stretch your mind. And for anyone who has an iPad or iPhone, there is the Work app that you can download and use in the moment, which will guide you through this process of questioning the thoughts that are causing you to worry. The only thoughts that cause us stress and pain are thoughts that are not questioned. Another good thing to ask yourself when you start to worry is, what would I say to a friend who had this worry? Number 4, keep a worry journal. Those of us who are chronic worriers have a mind absolutely cluttered with things that we are worrying about. You need to express them and get them out of your head. Writing them in a journal will seriously help you. Designate a time of day, not before you go to bed and not first thing in the morning, to make a list of everything that is worrying you. Beliefs, things you're sure will happen, anything that's causing you worry. Allow yourself to vomit up these worries onto the page. If you're a chronic worrier, you may need to do this at the same time each day so your mind is less anxious about when it gets to vent. Postpone worrying if it comes up until the time you have set aside for this worry journal. If you absolutely can't stop fixating on something you're worried about, write it down in that journal and put it aside for later. Postponing worry is effective because it breaks the habit of dwelling on worries in the present moment. Yet there's no struggle to suppress the thought or to judge it. You simply save it for later. As you develop the ability to postpone your anxious thoughts, you'll start to realize that you have more control over worrying than you think. Then, analyze this list and sort out things you are worried about that you can do something about right now. Let's call these productive worry items. For example, I'm going on a trip, so I'm worried about making plane and hotel reservations. This is a productive worry because I can take action right now by going online and making reservations. Evaluate the situation you are worrying about and come up with concrete steps for dealing with it, and then put your plan into action. This switches your worry from problem to solution. It is important to ask yourself, is the problem something that I'm currently facing, or is it an imaginary what if? If the problem is an imaginary what if, can you do something about the problem which would make you feel better about what you're worrying about? This is a kind of vibrational game that you're playing. The game you're playing is to come up with ways that you can release resistance to whatever it is that you're worrying about. Those of us who worry, like I said before, are not convinced that we create our own reality, so we can't stop focusing on the thing that we are the most worried about. So what is it going to take you to stop worrying about that thing? See, if we believed we created our own reality, there'd be no reason to go wear seatbelts. But as an anxious mother, when you strap your child into the car, it would be very difficult for you to stop worrying about car wrecks if your child did not have the seatbelt on. So the vibrational game you're playing is, what do I need to do to release resistance to the idea of my child or myself getting in a car wreck? If the answer is, put the seatbelt on, then put the seatbelt on. Why? Because it's not about the seatbelt. The seatbelt is not going to, in and of itself, make it so that when you get in a crash, you're going to survive it. It's not going to save you from getting in a crash either. But what's going to happen is, putting that seatbelt on is going to be what it takes for you to stop thinking about the potential of the crash. And because you have stopped thinking about the crash, you cannot be a match to it vibrationally. Because you are not thinking about it, it is not a vibration which you hold. Because it is not a vibration you hold, you cannot line up with it. So in this case, we can use our action to cause our own minds to line up with the reality we want, to stop focusing on the reality that we don't want. When you are worrying about something, make a list of all the possible solutions you can think of. Make this true brainstorming, so do not get too hung up on finding the perfect solution. It doesn't have to be a great idea, just put down any idea that you have. Focus on the things you have the power to change rather than the circumstances and realities that are beyond your control. After you've looked through all your options, make a plan of action. Once you have a plan and start doing something about the problem, you'll feel much less worried. Unproductive, unsolvable worries are those for which you can see no corresponding action. So it is important to realize that you're not doing any good by worrying about those things at all. It is a dead end. Those of us who chronically worry just keep trying to get that dead end to turn into something, when in fact we are lending energy to the very thing we are worried about. 5. Those of us who worry have a very difficult time providing certainty for ourselves. Most of us feel very incapable of providing ourselves with that basic human need. And because we have a difficult time providing ourselves with the basic human need of certainty, we struggle with uncertainty. We can't stand it. And we're convinced that worrying about something will make something more certain. Chronic worriers can't stand doubt and unpredictability. We need to know with 100% certainty what is going to happen. Worrying seems like a way to predict what the future has in store for us, a way to prevent unpleasant surprises and control the outcome. The problem is, it doesn't work. Thinking about all the things that could go wrong doesn't make life any more predictable. You may feel safer when you're worrying, but it's just an illusion. Focusing on the worst-case scenarios does not keep the bad thing from happening. It will only keep you from enjoying the good things that you have in the present. So if you want to stop worrying, start by tackling your need for certainty and immediate answers. Start by finding healthier ways to provide yourself with a sense of certainty. Uncertainty is a better place to be in than certainty that the worst case scenario is going to happen. But it just so happens that those of us that are the most chronic worriers have never really realized that uncertainty is much more comfortable than the thought of the worst case scenario, which is what's keeping us awake at night, which is what is causing us this amount of stress. It may help if you're a real catastrophe thinker to make a list of all the times in the past that you've been convinced of a worst case scenario, and it hasn't happened. Your brain needs proof to believe that what it thinks is not true. So as you look for these scenarios, and keep proving to yourself that, guess what? Look at this time, and this time, and this time I thought the worst case scenario was going to happen, and it didn't. The brain will look at that proof and say, oh, guess what? I can't actually believe that what I think is impending is impending. That will help you to move from the place of catastrophe to the place of uncertainty, which I promise you is so much more comfortable. 6. Stay focused in the present moment. When we are worrying, we are projecting ourselves into the future, we are projecting ourselves into the past. We are anywhere but here in the present moment. And so if you focus on the present moment, you will notice something interesting. Nothing is wrong with this moment. Everything is a future potential you're bringing into now, or a past thing that's happened that you're bringing into now. So a good practice is present moment practice, meaning bring yourself back to the room. Take a good look at your hands, at the lines on your hands. Feel what sensations you're feeling in your body. What things are you hearing in the room and the environment? I may be worried about a plane crash, but what's the reality? About now, because nothing else exists but this room. The reality about now is, I am sitting in a room. I am not in a plane crash. I'm sitting in a room. I can feel my breathing. I can hear the sounds in the room. Nothing is wrong with right now. 7. Realize that you are never going to get everything done. And it's impossible to get this life wrong. People who are chronic worriers are obsessed with having to get things right and obsessed with having to get things done, but neither is a possibility. Because universally there is no right or wrong. So you can't get something wrong if there is no right or wrong. Also, you can't ever get it done, because that is the nature of expansion. The minute that you reach a point of perspective, that perspective that you now hold will give rise to new desires. And when you have new desires, you'll have new things to do. So there will never be a point in your life where you will ever reach that finish line you're trying to reach. The minute you reach it, there will be another one. So it's not about reaching the finish line. It's not about getting things done. It's about the enjoyment you have while moving in the direction of that constantly receding finish line. 8. Many of us are worried about what other people think of us. But guess what? You can't worry what they think of you when you're thinking about them instead of yourself. So play a little game which I call the alien game. Focus all of your attention on understanding them. Think of them or observe them like an alien observer would, not like a vulnerable human peer. Write a list or make a mental list of your observations. This will take you out of worry mode. Then think about expressing yourself instead of trying to portray yourself so as to control what other people think of you. I promise, thinking about expressing yourself instead of controlling other people's opinions of you, what you want them to perceive when they look at you, takes much less energy, and it causes a lot less stress, ironically. And people will think better of you when this is the case, because you have released resistance to what they think or don't think. Right here and now, pretend you are a Martian gathering data on humans. As you notice what they do and say, without focusing on your fear or their opinions, you will feel less self-conscious, and they'll feel the non-judgmental attention they've always wanted from you. 9. Play a little game called the zoom out game. What the zoom out game is whenever you're worrying about something, zoom out, step back, and take a snapshot of the world in general, a bigger perspective on your worries. What in this world would be a bigger worry than the one that you hold now? For example, you may be worried that your midterm won't be done on time or that you'll get fired. Zoom out and look at a bigger problem within the world, such as the problems that other people have in third world countries. There are people starving, whose children are dying in front of their eyes. There are people who are refugees trying to escape persecution. You will stop worrying about whether you have all the place settings you need for tonight's party when you remember that it is lucky that you are worrying about that and not something else that people face every day on this planet, like losing loved ones. This technique will help to ground you in reality very quickly. It may even help to think about potential outcomes which might have been worse in your own past. We tend to get swept up in our day-to-day lives and forget that we faced really difficult things, much more difficult than what we're facing right now. When we're stressed about these trivial things in our life, maybe it will help to think back to a time when you might have been going through something much worse, like losing a loved one, and think about how lucky it is that you're not facing those kind of worries. Number 10. If you find yourself having a full-fledged panic attack, I want you to look up the video which I did called How to Stop a Panic Attack, and allow yourself to follow through with the process I present in that video. 11. Because those of us who are chronic worriers do not believe we create our own reality, we have to prove to ourselves that we create our own reality. This means take note of synchronicities. Most of us who are intent on proving that we create our own realities keep synchronicity journals. This is a place to record anything that is a pattern within the universe based on what you have been thinking about. For example, I'm about 2 days away from flying to New York for my next synchronization workshop. So Blake and I have been up to our ears in details. That usually happens before we're about to make a trip, but we've been focusing on New York. So yesterday, Blake decided to take a break and go out to a movie. At this movie theater, there's an arcade, and he was playing this arcade game. And the claw mechanism, which you've seen in those little toy games which they have for children, he was playing that game. The claw goes down, and what it grabs and eventually drops into the drop box for him to then pick up is this little clip pin thing that says New York City. That's a synchronicity you want to take note of, which will help your brain to understand that whatever you're focused on, you're a vibrational match to, and thus will manifest more of that thing in your life. You also want to play a visualization game, where you want to set the timer for 10 minutes. That's it, no more than 10 minutes. Any time during the day you want to do this. And during that 10 minutes, you want to focus on something, whatever it is, that you don't really care about. The reason it needs to be something you don't care about is because you have a lot of resistance to the things you desperately want. Meaning you might want a lover in your life, but you may have all kinds of beliefs that make it difficult for you to believe that you deserve it or that it will happen. That's resistance. So you don't want to think about anything you have resistance to. So think about something trivial, like chickens or bunnies or pins, something that you don't care about. And I want you to sit down and for that 10 minutes every day, I want you to focus on that one thing. So if I'm thinking about chickens, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to visualize them. I'm going to imagine stroking their feathers. I'm going to make that visualization of chickens so real to me that when that buzzer goes off, it's difficult to pull myself back into the reality of where I am here and now. And then I'm going to forget about it. I'm going to go about my day. But I'm going to watch for how chickens show up in my experience, because it is universal law that if you focus on something, it must show up in your reality. So you may see chicken bumper stickers. You may see chicken pattern plates. Chickens will begin to show up over and over again in multitude of ways. Paying attention to this, the fact that your thought is now dictating what you're a match to in your third dimensional reality, is what it's going to take for you to prove to yourself that you create your own reality. And you will feel a sense of empowerment, so you won't worry so much about creating the worst case scenario if you know it's in your hands to create it or not. I understand that this is a very frightening universe that we are living in when we're convinced that we don't create a reality which is ultimately out to get us. But the more you come to realize the universal truth that it is your thoughts that is creating your reality, the more control you will understand that you have over this. And the more control you have, the less worry you're going to have about being blindsided. Worry will cease to serve its purpose. Worry is a habit, and I can promise you that every single habit that is formed can be broken. So try out these steps, and have a good week.